At 8:47 in the morning, the sentence fell like a cold blade, slicing through the air of Summit First National Bank. This bank only serves qualified clients, ma'am. In the span of a single heartbeat, the marble hall seemed to freeze, as if the entire lobby had just witnessed something forbidden. Dr. Lauren Carter, 38 years old, stood beneath the filtered light pouring through the soaring glass ceiling. Her tailored Armani suit framed the confidence of a woman who had once presented macroeconomic strategy before the United States Congress, yet that confidence had been abruptly stopped by a remark soaked in prejudice. Her hand tightened around her leather portfolio, the sensation like someone had tried to strip away her dignity in a place supposedly built to safeguard human worth. But deep within her silence, a storm was slowly forming. At the reception desk, Emily Rogers, 24, lounged back in her swivel chair, eyes lifting from her iPhone for barely half a second before returning to Instagram stories. To Emily, Lauren was nothing more than a walk in a stranger, lacking the markers she believed defined a real banking elite. In her mind, unconscious judgments lined up effortlessly. Real corporate clients do not wear solid-colored suits. They do not arrive alone, and they certainly are not like that. Lauren's polite request, "I need to speak with the person in charge of opening business accounts," was cut off by a sharp voice. "We do not accept walk-ins for business accounts, especially from small companies." At that moment, Lauren felt 4 pairs of eyes scattered across the lobby staring at her. Confusion, pity, annoyance, emotions blooming outward like ink diffusing in water. Yet she remained upright, unmoving, unbowed. Because the thing that truly made her chest tremble was not the insult. It was the memory of countless stories she had heard, black entrepreneurs judged entirely by their appearance, doors quietly closed, not because of competence, but because of invisible cold bias. The pain was never the words themselves, it was the familiarity of them. In the waiting area, 17-year-old Zoe Parker was live-streaming her morning for nearly 50,000 followers. She had only wanted to capture the morning vibe of a luxury bank lobby. But when she saw the scene unfold, Emily's dismissive stare, the sharp tone slicing through Lauren's attempt to explain, Zoe instinctively lifted her phone higher. Her lens became a silent third eye, a witness that did not blink. Comments flooded in immediately. "What is going on? Why does this kind of behavior still exist? Why is she not reacting, sharp as whispers of outrage, echoing through a grand theater?" Farther away, Daniel Brooks, 41. The morning security officer watched everything with a heavy gaze. He had witnessed many similar moments, and knew that the scripted apologies afterward never repaired the real damage. Emily's words trickled into his ears in pieces. "We serve real clients here, especially those with appointments, and who fit." The word "fit" made Daniel's stomach tighten. He had heard it too many times, and it always left a bitter aftertaste. In front of him, Lauren stood still, lips gently pressed together, eyes fixed on the desk. From an experienced observer like Daniel, she did not appear weak. On the contrary, there was an unusual calm radiating from her posture, a quiet stillness that told him something was about to go wrong. Not wrong for her, but for the one who had underestimated her. Deep inside Lauren's thoughts, memories flickered, tense meetings in Washington, D.C. strategic economic proposals, federal-level decisions. She had stood before some of the nation's most powerful figures without flinching. Yet this morning, a single sentence from a stranger had scraped at an old wound she thought she had grown numb to. She inhaled slowly, steadied herself, and spoke clearly, each word a small act of self-respect. "I was referred by Senator Cole's office, and I would like to speak with the highest authority in charge." Emily cut her off again, her voice now sharp as a blade. "Mr. Blake is busy meeting with real clients. You should try the community banks down the street. More fitting for you." A cold shiver crept down Lauren's spine. Not because of the insult, but because of the certainty in Emily's tone, the kind of confidence held by someone who truly believed the world stood behind her. Lauren had no chance to respond before the glass door of the office opened. Thomas Blake. 52 stepped out, adjusting his collar like a man preparing to pass judgment. Lauren felt her heart give one hard thump, not out of fear, but because she knew something they did not. And in just a few minutes the truth would surface, and this entire branch would never look the same as it did at 8:47 in the morning. Lauren stood tall, unmoving. Outside, the Atlanta sun began to spill through the windows, casting a bright glare against the glass behind Thomas Blake, as if the entire morning were illuminating a path she had not planned to walk, but now had no choice but to enter, because of one sentence, one moment, one small act of dismissal. Yet those small moments are often the sparks that ignite the greatest change. And Lauren understood that better than anyone. She had not come here only to open an account. She had come unknowingly, yet inevitably to prove that real power does not need to boast to exist. It only needs the right moment to appear. And right now that moment was drawing near. Thomas Blake stepped out of his office with the posture of a man convinced the world moved along an orbit he alone had designed. Light reflected off his slicked back, salt and pepper hair. His deep, navy-tailored suit fit his frame perfectly, and every step carried the practiced authority of someone far more accustomed to giving orders than listening to anyone. But the moment his eyes landed on Lauren Carter, a black woman standing tall with a leather portfolio in her arms, the look in his eyes shifted. Sharper, colder, carrying that familiar, silent judgment Lauren had experienced too many times in her life. He did not ask her name. He did not ask what she needed. He simply turned to Emily and asked, in the clipped tone of a man who believed he could not possibly be wrong, "What is going on here?" Emily straightened immediately, like a pawn recognizing the presence of a king. "Mr. Blake, this woman wants to open a business account without an appointment." The dismissiveness packed into the words "this woman wants" was impossible to miss. Thomas nodded the corner of his mouth, lifting into a faint, irritated smile. Lauren felt her whole body tense, not out of fear, but because she knew she was facing a wall built out of arrogance. "Ma'am," Thomas began, his voice sugar-coated steel, "this bank serves qualified clients. Business accounts here require strong, capital-solid credit history," and he gestured toward the sparkling crystal chandelier, above them a level of professionalism that matches this environment. Every word he chose was deliberate, carefully crafted, to remain just below the threshold of something he could be sued for. But Lauren understood. People like her always understood. The phrase qualified clients was not about money. It was about skin, about bias, about doors that quietly opened only for the chosen few. Zoe Parker, phone raised high, gasped. Oh my God, he actually said that comments flooded her screen. That is open discrimination. She should sue him. How is this still happening in 2025? Around the lobby, customers slowly turned to watch Lauren. The way people watch a crash they know is wrong but feel powerless to interrupt. Near the entrance, Daniel Brooks tightened his grip on his radio. He had seen Thomas behave poorly before, but never this boldly. In Lauren's eyes, he saw something deeply unsettling, a terrifying level of composure, the kind only people who command boardrooms or testify before Congress are capable of holding. Lauren drew in a long, slow breath, as if reminding herself that the world still held countless people unwilling to recognize the value of a black woman. "Mr. Blake?" She said, her voice soft, but every syllable sharp enough to carve stone. "I have documents you need to see. I believe that once you read them, you will understand. I do not need to see anything," he cut her off, dismissing her as if she had opened her mouth to say something absurd. "We have procedures, and the procedure says that clients who are not qualified are asked to leave the bank." The word "asked" sounded exactly like forced, and everyone heard it that way. Emily folded her arms upright and ready, waiting for the signal. Lauren stared straight at Thomas. She did not move. She did not blink. She did not take a single step back. She had been underestimated many times, but rarely had the disrespect been this sharp, this blatant. Inside Thomas's mind, a cold thought slid by. Someone like her wants a business account, a complete waste of time. Like many powerful men insulated by privilege, he saw Lauren's presence not as a customer, but as an inconvenience, an interruption to his otherwise orderly morning. What he didn't know was that this morning would destroy his entire career. Lauren kept her voice controlled. "I would like to repeat that I was referred by Senator Andrew Cole's office. I do not care which senator referred you," Thomas said, louder, making sure the entire lobby heard. "Our clients are not like you, and they have their reasons." Silence dropped over the room. Zoe's jaw fell open. Daniel felt his heartbeat stutter. A few customers exhaled hard. Others dropped their gaze, embarrassed for him, ashamed by his words. Lauren did not flinch, but inside a slow flame began to rise. Not anger, but truth. She knew she was not insignificant. She knew she was not unqualified. She was simply being judged by people who had no idea who they were dealing with. "Sir," she said one final time, her voice lower, stronger, carrying farther, "I strongly advise you to reconsider your decision right now." Thomas laughed, a dry, arrogant sound. "I do not change my decisions because someone feels offended. This is my branch. I decide who gets served, and you do not." The sentence fell like a prison door slamming shut. Into her live stream, Zoe whispered, "Oh my God, he just dug his own grave." Daniel knew, with the instinct of someone hardened by years of experience, that something was very, very wrong. Not the usual kind of wrong he had seen too many times, but something different. Something dangerous. Because Lauren Carter was not reacting like most insulted customers. She was not yelling, not breaking down, not walking away. She was just standing there looking directly at Thomas. Her eyes were not the eyes of someone pushed back. They were the eyes of someone waiting for the right moment to strike. And then, just as Thomas turned to walk back into his office, Lauren reached into her blazer pocket and pulled out her phone. The motion was slow, steady, unmistakably powerful. "Very well," she said. "Then there is no other option." The lobby fell silent as she lifted the phone to her ear. "It is time," Lauren said softly, "for you to meet your new superior." A quiet sentence, light as air, yet it was the first storm wind that would shatter everything Thomas believed he controlled. Lauren lifted the phone to her ear, the motion smooth, yet sharp like a blade poised to slice through the arrogance hanging over the entire branch. The bank lobby fell so silent that if someone had spilled a drop of coffee, the sound would have echoed. But the only thing that filled the air was Lauren's voice, low calm and carrying a quiet authority no one here had anticipated. "Sister Olivia, this is Lauren Carter. I am standing inside the Midtown branch, and just as we feared, the serious incident has happened." The phrase, "the serious incident has happened," made Daniel Brooks freeze, and Zoe nearly dropped her phone in shock. Her live stream viewer count surged from 3,000 to 4,500 in 20 seconds, as if thousands of people sensed that an earthquake was beginning. On the other end, the voice of Olivia Grant, 49 years old, came through clearly on speaker, and Lauren made no effort to hide it. "Lauren, you are at Midtown. Is it Thomas Blake again?" That single sentence made Thomas's heartbeat stumble. Emily's face drained of color. Several customers covered their mouths, stunned. The name Blake dropped into the room like a stone, and for the first time that morning, Thomas's confidence wavered. "Yes," Lauren replied, eyes locked on Thomas's stiffening expression. "He is continuing exactly the same pattern you and I discussed last week. Refusing to review documents, refusing service-making comments that are not appropriate. And everything is being live-streamed. There are already more than 3,000 viewers." Olivia was silent for half a second, but that silence carried the weight of an entire power structure. Then she spoke, each word crisp and decisive. "Lauren, do not leave the branch. Michael Turner is on his way. We will resolve this completely this morning." The moment that name was spoken, Daniel jolted. A security officer like him knew Michael Turner's reputation very well. 45 years old head of internal investigations, a man who only appeared when a branch was officially classified as a red-level legal risk. His arrival never meant warning. It meant endings. Thomas tried to regain his calm, but his voice trembled like a glass about to crack. Was that Olivia Grant? "You actually know her?" Lauren simply stared at him. Her gaze so cold, Thomas felt as if he had stepped onto thin ice. "You will meet her soon enough," she said, her voice gentle, but containing the steady power of someone who fully understood where the balance of authority now lay. Zoe turned the camera toward Thomas and whispered to nearly 5,000 viewers, "Oh my God, he is turning pale. Who is this woman, and why does she have this much power?" Comments exploded. "She is leadership for sure. Government position? Maybe this is peak drama. Everything is about to collapse." Thomas tried to ignore the chaos swirling around him and spoke again, his tone straining to hold authority. I do not understand why you are exaggerating this. This is a minor misunderstanding. We can speak privately." "You made it public," Lauren answered immediately, unwavering. "I am simply stating the truth." Daniel stepped half a pace forward and said quietly, "Mr. Blake, I think you should wait and see what this is before you." "Be quiet," Daniel Thomas snapped louder than necessary, and that was the moment he destroyed himself. Instantly, Zoe swung the camera toward him. He just yelled at the security guard, "Oh wow, he is done. Completely done." 9 o'clock. The automatic glass doors slid open, and the world seemed to stop. A sleek black SUV glided to the entrance. A tall, broad-shouldered man stepped out, moving with the steady confidence of a former service member. His charcoal grey suit was razor-sharp, and his eyes carried the piercing focus of someone who could see straight through every layer of bias in this branch with a single glance. Michael Turner had arrived. Emily stopped breathing. Thomas instinctively stepped back, half a pace, as if his survival instincts were screaming at him to run. But it was far too late. Michael walked straight into the lobby, not looking left or right, only at Lauren. "Dr. Carter," he said, with a respectful nod. I sincerely apologize on behalf of Summit First National. Olivia has informed me of the entire situation, and I assure you everything will be handled immediately." The lobby erupted into stunned whispers. The live stream audience shouted in disbelief. He called her Doctor. Dr. Thomas went rigid lips, trembling. He looked at Emily for support, but her eyes were filled with fear. Michael opened his tablet, swiped once, then turned the screen toward Thomas. "Allow me to introduce," he said, his tone calm but sharp as steel, Dr. Lauren Carter. Doctor of Economics from Wharton, former advisor to the Federal Reserve. And most importantly, as of yesterday morning, she has been appointed the Chief Diversity Officer for the entire southeastern region, directly overseeing all compliance and anti-discrimination operations for every branch. The final words slammed into the marble floor like a hammer strike. No one breathed. No one moved. Because suddenly, they understood the terrifying truth. The woman Thomas Blake had dismissed as an unqualified customer was the very person with the authority to evaluate restructure and terminate his entire chain of command. Thomas's face drained completely. His breath hitched. Every word he had spoken earlier, "Our clients are not like you," now twisted into a blade turning back on him. Zoe whispered into the live stream, "Oh my God, this is the strongest plot twist I have ever seen." Michael continued his tone, leaving no room for argument. "We will be conducting a full investigation of this entire branch. And we begin now." But Lauren had not yet said the most important part. She stepped forward, her expression calm, yet more commanding than any shout Thomas had ever used in 15 years of management. "Mr. Blake," Lauren said, "I gave you the opportunity to resolve this privately. But you chose to humiliate me in front of the entire lobby. So now everyone here, and more than 5,000 people watching this live stream, will witness the consequences of those choices." A long breath escaped from someone in the waiting area. Emily covered her mouth. Daniel looked at Thomas with a heavy stare, but there was no sympathy left in it. And in that exact moment, within the vacuum of silence swallowing the room, Thomas finally understood that the life he was familiar with was ending. Not with an explosion, but with one phone call, one live stream, one woman he had completely underestimated, and the harshest truth of all had still not been spoken. But it was coming, very soon, like thunder rolling in just seconds before the storm breaks. The air inside the Midtown branch had thickened to the point where one more sentence might have been enough to make the tempered glass tremble. Thomas Blake stood frozen, his face drained of color, his eyes wide, like a man staring at the shadow of his own career hanging over a guillotine. Michael Turner remained firm and unmoving, a steel pillar in the center of the room, while Lauren Carter stepped forward, another half step, just enough for everyone to see the cold, controlled calm in her eyes. A kind of calm that never belonged to the powerless, but only to those who truly hold authority. "I think," Lauren said, her voice dropping lower, "it is time you understand the full situation." She opened her portfolio and pulled out a stack of documents, but she did not hand them to anyone. Instead, she placed them on the reception counter, so gently that it made no sound, yet the gesture landed like a formal indictment laid onto the scales of justice. "Mr. Blake," she continued, "I did not come here by chance. I am conducting a covert evaluation, a mystery audit that Chairwoman Grant and I planned for the past 3 weeks, designed to measure compliance with anti-discrimination standards at high-risk branches. And unfortunately for you, Midtown ranks at the top of that list. Emily gasped aloud. You work for corporate. You are not a customer." Zoe Parker almost screamed, her live stream exploding from 7,000 viewers in less than 2 minutes. A mystery audit. Oh my God. The manager is done. Plot twist of the year. Thomas stumbled back a step, his spine hitting the counter, his hands trembling as if searching for something solid to hold on to in the middle of a hurricane. He stared at Lauren the way people stare at a bomb they accidentally armed. This is the periodic evaluation. The board approved," Lauren said, her tone steady and sharp. "And this morning you failed completely. Not a small mistake. You failed in every procedure, every remark, every look." Michael Turner nodded and turned his tablet toward a document highlighted in red. Midtown ranks among the branches, with 17 discrimination complaints in 3 years. That number is 3 times higher than the system average, and your refusal to review Dr. Carter's documents only reinforces the established pattern. Thomas tried to speak. "I didn't mean to. I didn't know who she was, "You didn't know because you never asked," Lauren cut in her voice, so precise that Emily flinched. "You made a decision about who I was in the 3 seconds it took you to glance at me. And you acted as if that decision was absolute truth." The lobby fell into complete silence. Even the older customers sitting in the waiting area lowered their newspapers, eyes wide. Daniel Brooks stood behind Lauren, one hand resting on his security belt, but his gaze fixed on Thomas, weighed down by the silent realization that he was witnessing the downfall of a man who had stood too high for too long. Olivia's voice came through the phone speaker again, because Lauren had never turned it off. "Lauren, I am watching the live stream. Viewers have passed 8,000. The legal team just messaged me. Keep the scene exactly as it is until Michael completes his report. We will proceed under emergency protocol." The words "the legal team is watching the live stream" sent cold sweat down Emily's spine, and Thomas's heart jolted so violently that his hand lost its grip on the counter. Michael stepped forward and noted something on his tablet. "Mr. Blake, effective immediately, you are not to leave the branch. I will be collecting statements from all parties, including employees and customers, and especially the witnesses on the live stream." "Live stream," Thomas choked out. Zoe brought the camera closer, whispering, "Yes, sir. Live stream. 8,300 people are watching your downfall." Michael continued, his tone perfectly even. "We also have full footage from the security cameras. But a public live stream carries exceptionally strong legal weight in discrimination cases." Lauren looked directly at Thomas, not angry, not shaking, but with the quiet certainty of someone stating a truth that could not be negotiated. "You did not simply insult a customer. You insulted an executive newly appointed to reform this entire region. And more importantly, you insulted every person who has ever silently endured the behavior you consider normal." The silence that followed was heavy, settling over the lobby like dust after an explosion. The looks from customers pierced straight into Thomas, forcing him to confront the brutal truth that his 15-year career had been destroyed by his own choices in less than 10 minutes. His mind began replaying memories in fragments, awards, recognition plaques, internal praise for effective management, the meetings where he spoke with confidence, all of them now overshadowed by a morning he assumed was just removing a troublesome customer. Then Daniel spoke, his voice slow, but carrying through the entire room. "Dr. Carter, I want to state clearly that what Mr. Blake did this morning does not reflect the values of all employees here. I will serve as a witness if needed. Zoe nearly squealed. The security guard said it. "Oh my God, he is so brave." Livestream comments erupted. "Respect to the guard. He is the real one here." "Promote that man." Lauren turned to Daniel, her gaze softening for the briefest moment, just long enough for him to understand that his courage had become a small light in a morning full of shadows. Then she looked back at Thomas, her voice low, no longer sharp, yet somehow far more devastating. "Mr. Blake, I did not want this to happen. I gave you the chance to correct your mistake. But you chose arrogance over listening, and the price always arrives quickly for those who believe they are immune to consequences." Michael stepped beside her, opened the official investigation log, and spoke the sentence that made the entire lobby feel weightless for a heartbeat. Effective immediately, Mr. Blake is suspended from his position as branch manager of Midtown. A final decision will be made after the emergency meeting with the board within the next 2 hours. Thomas inhaled sharply, as if trying to pull in the last remaining breath of a career in its death throes. And then Olivia called again, her voice cold as forged steel. "Lauren, prepare yourself. If what I saw on the live stream is accurate, Mr. Blake will be terminated before the end of today." The bank lobby fell into a silence that was not fear, but truth. A truth that had been exposed and could never be taken back. At 9:04 in the morning, the Midtown bank lobby was no longer a calm place of routine transactions. It had transformed into a stage where an old, deeply rooted power structure was beginning to crack open. Thomas Blake, a man who once walked with his chest out and the unshakable confidence of someone who believed himself untouchable, now stood like a fractured statue, eyes, vacant breaths, broken sweat gathering on his temples in trembling beads. Emily Rogers looked drained of all color, her hands shaking as she realized her own careless words had now become publicly documented evidence. Across the lobby, customers who had only come in to deposit or withdraw money suddenly found themselves witnesses to a story they could hardly believe was real, a story they would retell for years. Zoe Parker still clutched her phone tightly, her live stream climbing to 9,100 viewers' comments, firing so fast she could not keep up. "He is done." Zoom in on his face. Digital justice in real time. Each comment struck like another hammer blow against the wall of arrogance Thomas had spent 15 years constructing. Michael Turner stood tall, posture, rigid, his voice resonating like the reading of a verdict. "We will collect statements from all witnesses, including customers, employees, and the live stream source. This is a regional-level investigation, and all evidence is being preserved according to legal protocol." Thomas tried to speak, but his voice rasped. "Michael, I have served this bank for 15 years. All of this just because." "Not because of a single incident," Lauren said, as she stepped forward, cutting him off, "but because of a pattern. You know that. And in my position, I cannot ignore it." Her final words were not merely spoken. They were a sentence, handed down in front of the entire lobby and thousands of online viewers. Lauren turned to the counter and gently pushed a first-class boarding pass across its surface, letting the overhead lights catch the edge of the paper like a quiet challenge. "Last night," she said slowly, "I flew from Washington, D.C., back to Atlanta for a meeting with the board of directors. A meeting where they discussed the situation at the Midtown branch and approved my appointment." A shocked inhale came from an older customer. Emily nearly collapsed into the chair behind her hand, covering her mouth, eyes wide with disbelief. Lauren continued, her voice slicing through the haze of confusion, settling over those who thought they understood everything. And this morning, Mr. Blake, you chose to ignore every document, every explanation, every opportunity to change course. You have exposed to the world what many customers have endured silently." Michael stopped writing and looked directly at Thomas. In the past 3 years, this branch has recorded a total of 17 discrimination complaints. Each one describes behavior identical to what we all witnessed on this live stream. This is not coincidence. This is not a mistake. This is a toxic culture originating from its leadership. Thomas swallowed hard, his eyes red, his voice breaking into something close to pleading. "Lauren, I am sorry, but you must understand. I only thought. You thought I was not qualified," Lauren finished for him, her words, razor thin and merciless. "You thought I did not belong here. You thought a real business client would never look like me." Thomas fell heavily into the nearest chair hands, covering his head like a tree cut down in one swing. He had believed he was enforcing standards and protecting procedures, but now every false layer had been stripped away. Beneath it all was arrogance, bias, and racial assumptions he had never acknowledged. Daniel Brooks clenched his jaw, his eyes bright with the sense that justice was finally rising. He stepped forward, his voice stronger than before. "I want to make something clear to everyone. What Mr. Blake did this morning is not new. I have seen it. I have watched customers of color spoken to the same way, but this time someone finally spoke up. 'Thank you,' Lauren said, and in that rare moment her voice softened, if only for an instant. The entire lobby seemed to inhale at once, like the ocean pulling back before a massive wave crashes ashore. And that wave came from Olivia Grant, her voice suddenly ringing again through Lauren's phone. "Lauren, I have watched the entire live stream, and I have reached a decision." Her tone was sharp enough to cut glass, showing not a hint of hesitation. "I am calling an emergency board meeting at 10:15. Michael, secure the scene. Lauren, prepare the documentation. And if what I saw on the live stream is accurate, the Midtown branch will undergo full restructuring, beginning with the termination of Mr. Blake." The final words landed like a timed explosive, finally touching its fuse. Gasps spread through the lobby. A phone slipped from someone's hand. Someone whispered, "Oh Lord," under their breath. Thomas Blake closed his eyes, and 2 tears slid down his cheeks, not from remorse, but from the sudden realization that privilege is not immortal. And in that moment, Lauren Carter, the woman he had dismissed as an inconvenient customer, stood before him, not as a nuisance, but as the doorway into a new era, for a system he once believed he controlled. As for Zoe, her live stream hit 10,600 viewers, and one comment was pinned at the top, "This is the morning Midtown Bank will never forget." At 9:06 in the morning, the air inside the Midtown branch had grown so dense it felt as if every breath carried the metallic taste of tension. Yet for Lauren Carter, this moment held an eerie stillness, as though all surrounding sound had been compressed until only the heartbeat of those facing the truth remained. "There is something I haven't said," Lauren began, her voice slow and sharp, like the edge of freshly cut glass. "Something that will explain why your morning Mr. Blake will be recorded in internal documentation as a textbook example of systemic bias." She opened her portfolio, and this time pulled out an envelope embossed with the Summit First National logo. When she unfolded the paper, light swept across the raised red seal in the corner, prompting a strangled gasp from Emily Rogers. "This," Lauren said, holding the document toward Michael Turner and angling it deliberately so everyone could see the bold headline, Appointment letter. Chief Diversity Officer, Southeast Region. The blow struck Thomas like a fist to the chest. His breath fractured into shallow pieces, and Zoe let out a sharp cry on her live stream. "Oh my God, this is a bombshell." Comments exploded. "Scene of the year. The manager is finished. Unbelievable." Lauren continued her voice, now quieter but carrying a weight that radiated through every person in the room. "Yesterday I left Washington, D.C. after an executive meeting where the corporation's leadership reviewed branches with a history of discriminatory behavior. Midtown is at the top of the red list." Michael Turner nodded. "I was present at that meeting. Chairwoman Grant emphasized that this branch required special monitoring, and Dr. Carter was assigned to conduct a covert inspection. As he finished, Emily nearly collapsed into her chair. She lowered her head, remembering every word she had spoken, each curt dismissal, each judgmental glance, all delivered right in front of the person who held the power to terminate her employment within a heartbeat. This Emily whispered voice shaking, "This is a nightmare." But for Thomas, the nightmare was only beginning. Lauren turned toward him, not with anger, but with something far heavier, the kind of disappointment that carried weight. "Mr. Blake," she said, "you refuse to review my documents. You refuse to give me any chance to prove who I was. But more importantly, you refused to fulfill the responsibility every manager is entrusted with, maintaining a culture of respect and equity in the place you lead." Thomas stammered. "Oh, I didn't intend to discriminate against anyone. Unintentional." Lauren repeated, "Yet you did. And that is the problem with discrimination today. It no longer shows itself through blatant insults, but through decisions that appear logical, through comments that sound like policy, through looks that seem harmless." The room fell into a silence so complete it felt as if sound itself had been stolen. Daniel Brooks gave a small nod, his eyes acknowledging that Lauren had just spoken on behalf of countless people like him, people who had witnessed, endured, and kept quiet, because no one had ever stood up for them. Lauren continued, her voice lowering again. "And today you did not just discriminate against a customer. You discriminated against the very person the executive board appointed to determine whether you are still fit to manage this branch." Zoe leaned closer to her camera. 10,300 viewers were watching every breath, every shift in Thomas's expression. Michael Turner checked his watch, then spoke. "I will now read the incident into the investigation record." He opened his tablet and read aloud, his voice echoing cleanly. At 8:47 in the morning, the Midtown branch refused service to Dr. Lauren Carter without reviewing any documents. Statements containing racial bias and discriminatory intent were captured on livestream. The branch manager, Mr. Thomas Blake, publicly stated that "our clients are not like you," and suggested she seek a bank more appropriate for her area. "This constitutes a severe violation of our anti-discrimination policy." Thomas blurted, "That is not what I meant." Lauren turned back toward him, her voice no longer cold, but carrying the compressed exhaustion of someone who had endured this far too many times to be surprised. "But that is what you said. And when you hold the power, intention does not matter. Impact does." An older customer near the waiting chairs murmured, "That is the truest thing I have heard today." Michael continued reading each line, driving another nail into the coffin of Thomas's career. "Given the volume of evidence from multiple sources, I recommend immediate suspension of Mr. Blake until the board issues a final decision." For the first time that morning, Thomas did not try to argue. He sat still, his eyes empty, as though watching himself fall from a cliff he had never realized he was standing on. Lauren turned away, but before stepping back, she spoke a sentence that tightened every heart in the room. "Mr. Blake, I never wanted to destroy anyone's career. But today, you destroyed your own." Emily broke down in tears. Thomas buried his face in his trembling hands. Daniel stepped forward, lowering his voice so only Lauren could hear. "Thank you for not letting this continue unchecked." Zoe whispered to her live stream of 11,000 viewers, "Everyone, this is more than drama. This is justice." A message appeared on Michael's tablet from Olivia Grant. "Prepare for the meeting. The evidence is sufficient for immediate termination." Michael lifted his gaze to Lauren and said, "We need to head to headquarters. The meeting will determine the fate of this entire branch." And so when the clock reached 9:15, the journey that began as a morning of disrespect for Lauren shifted into the beginning of a full-scale organizational reform. A morning that seemed ordinary became the day truth reclaimed its rightful place. A morning that made everyone understand one lesson with crystal clarity: no one has the right to dismiss another human being based on assumptions. And on that day, the person who had been underestimated became the one rewriting the rules. At 10:15 in the morning, the conference room on the 32nd floor of Summit First National's Atlanta headquarters blazed with sunlight pouring through towering glass panels. The air inside that vast room felt heavy, as if every molecule were waiting for an explosion. LED screens flickered to life, connecting faces from New York, Chicago, Dallas, and Miami. Members of the board of directors, the people who held the power to decide the fate of tens of thousands of employees, stared intently at the documents, videos, and reports in front of them. At the long conference table, Lauren Carter sat near the main display, her laptop already queued to the saved live stream. Michael Turner sat beside her, each of his steady nods reinforcing the gravity of what had unfolded that morning. At the end of the table stood Olivia Grant, arms crossed her eyes, razor sharp as she scanned each board member to ensure no one underestimated what was about to be presented. The board chair, Richard Lawson, 62 years old, set both hands on the table and spoke in a low but firm voice. "Dr. Carter, please begin." Lauren rose. The room was so silent that even the faint scrape of her chair sounded like a blade sliding across stone. She did not offer preamble, no disclaimers, no excess emotion. She simply pressed play on the recording at the exact moment Thomas Blake said, "Our clients are not like you." The entire room froze. Even those attending via video leaned closer to their screens. Lauren let the footage continue for several seconds, long enough for everyone to absorb the disdain in Thomas's voice, the judgment in his posture, the fear in Emily's eyes, and the number climbing past 10,000 live viewers. She stopped the video and said, "This is not a minor incident. This is the culmination of a problem that has been flagged repeatedly for 3 years. She switched slides. A screen full of red numbers appeared. 17 discrimination complaints connected to the Midtown branch minority customer attrition rates, double that of the region, a 0% promotion rate for employees of color over 15 years. A board member from New York frowned. 17 complaints. Why did no one address this earlier? Olivia answered immediately, her voice cold. Because Thomas Blake performed well on revenue metrics, and for far too long this bank has prioritized numbers over values. Michael Turner added, "Ignoring values is the fastest way to land us in federal court, and this morning everything Blake did was recorded publicly. This is no longer an internal matter. It is now a national legal exposure. Lauren moved to the third slide, showing live stream analytics. Here is the spread. The graph shot upward like a rocket. 3,000, 5,000, 10,000, 15,000 viewers. The video has now surpassed 75,000 views. And it is doubling every hour. A board member muttered, "We are becoming a media target." "We already are," Lauren replied, her voice steady. We just had not acknowledged it. She inhaled deeply before delivering the sentence that refocused the entire room on her. "If we do not act quickly, decisively, and transparently, Summit First National will become the worst corporate discrimination case of this decade." Richard Lawson nodded slowly. "Then what is your recommendation?" Lauren presented a plan honed as sharply as a surgical blade. First, immediate termination of Thomas Blake for severe policy violations and major reputational risk. Second, temporary closure of the Midtown branch for 48 hours for a full cultural assessment. Third, mandatory retraining for all Southeast Region staff on unconscious bias, equitable service protocols, and accountability. Fourth, deployment of real-time discrimination, reporting tools, and AI-driven monitoring. She paused, letting each point settle before delivering the final one. And lastly, implementation of a transparent promotion model within 2 years to guarantee real advancement opportunities for underrepresented employees. The room fell silent. Not a silence of resistance, but of realization. A silence belonging to people who saw the right path ahead, but one that would demand sweeping institutional change. A board member from Chicago finally spoke. "These measures are extreme. This is just one branch." Lauren lifted her head, her eyes burning with clarity. "No, this is a mirror of our culture." She emphasized each word. "And culture begins with the behavior leadership allows." Olivia smiled, firm and approving. Michael Turner added, "If we do not act now, tomorrow, there will be 10 Midtowns." Richard Lawson looked at Lauren, then at the others. "It is time to vote." Hands rose. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 in favor. None opposed. 1 abstained. Richard tapped his pen lightly on the table. "Dr. Carter's proposals are officially approved, effective immediately." Lauren sat down her hands, trembling slightly from adrenaline, but her heart eerily calm. She knew this moment was not about personal victory, nor revenge for a morning of disrespect. It was a turning point, a door opening for hundreds of employees who had stayed silent for too long. And when Richard spoke again, Lauren understood she had just authored a new chapter for the entire institution. "Dr. Carter, from this moment, you have full authority to restructure the Midtown branch. Do what must be done." No one else spoke. Yet in that silence, there was respect. There was trust. There was acknowledgement that a black woman who 90 minutes earlier had been told she did not belong at a service counter was now leading the reform of an entire region. And outside the glass walls, the city of Atlanta moved on, unaware that in a single morning, one woman had ignited the spark of system-wide change. At 10:55 in the morning, the mirrored elevator slid down to the ground floor of Summit First National's headquarters, reflecting Lauren Carter's face beneath the warm golden lights. She was not tired, despite the weight of the meeting she had just come from. On the contrary, she carried a sharpened energy like a spark, freshly reforged on an anvil. When the doors opened, she and Michael Turner stepped out their strides, firm across the polished marble floor, each step bearing the authority of decisions approved by the highest level of the bank. Outside, the Atlanta wind blew hard, scattering bits of paper along the sidewalk, but inside, Lauren, there was a strange calm, as if her thoughts had finally aligned with the justice she had long pursued. They moved quickly toward the black SUV, exchanging few words. They did not need to speak. They both knew it was time to return to Midtown and deliver the judgment the board had just signed. When the vehicle stopped in front of the Midtown branch, Michael checked his watch. 11:05. "Perfect timing," he said. Lauren stepped out to the breeze, lifting strands of her hair, yet her posture remained unshaken sharp as a line that refused to bend. The glass doors of the branch opened, and instantly the atmosphere inside changed, as if an electric field swept through the room. Every customer in the lobby recognized her, the woman who had been stopped at the counter that morning, now walking in as though she belonged here more than anyone. Emily Rogers nearly dropped the stack of papers in her hands. Her face drained of color, her fingers interlaced tightly until the knuckles turned white. Near the entrance, Daniel Brooks straightened, giving Lauren a respectful nod, not out of fear, but out of admiration. To him, she was no longer just the woman who had been turned away earlier. She was the one who had stood up and revealed the truth to the entire system, and that alone made him believe the branch might finally have a future, even if that future began with destruction. Thomas Blake stood behind the counter, his back leaning weakly against the edge. He did not look up until he heard the echo of Lauren's and Michael's footsteps on the marble floor. When he finally raised his eyes, they widened pupils, shrinking like a man staring at an unread death warrant. No, this cannot be," he stuttered. You came back this fast." Michael did not answer. Instead, he opened his leather briefcase and pulled out an envelope stamped with red wax. He placed it on the counter before Thomas quietly, but the sound of it touching the surface was sharper than any word he might have spoken. "Mr. Blake, this is the official decision." Thomas stared at the envelope as if it were something alien, then reached for it with trembling horns. When he opened it, the first line hit him like a blade. Termination. Effective immediately. He stepped back, the document nearly slipping from his fingers. No, I have served this bank for 15 years. I brought in revenue. And you also brought in 17 discrimination complaints. Lauren said, her voice low, but ringing like a bronze bell. You created a culture where employees were afraid and customers felt inferior. And this morning, you confirmed all of it in front of tens of thousands of people. Thomas looked around, desperate like a trapped animal. "Miss Carter, please. I have a family." "This job is all I have." Lauren drew a deep breath. Her eyes softened not with weakness, but with the weary sadness of someone who had endured the very biases he had perpetuated. "I take no pleasure in anyone losing their job," she said. "But you were given more chances than most of the people you turned away. And every one of those chances you wasted." Michael continued, professional and emotionless. "You are required to vacate the branch within 20 minutes. Remaining paid leave will be processed. But under the ethics clause in your contract, all bonuses and severance are revoked." A murmur rippled through the customers. A woman near the counter whispered, "He brought this on himself." Thomas collapsed forward against the counter hands, gripping its edge until his skin reddened. It was not just the loss of a job. It was the collapse of the delusion he had lived under his entire life, the belief that his authority was untouchable. While he wrestled with reality, Lauren turned to Emily. The young receptionist, once arrogant and dismissive behind the desk, now looked like a leaf ready to fall, her eyes swollen, her lips trembling. "Miss Rogers," Lauren said, her voice firm but not unkind. Do you understand why you are being reprimanded today? Emily nodded rapidly as tears spilled over. Yes, I was wrong. I should never have spoken to you that way. I followed Mr. Blake's lead, but that is not an excuse. I am so sorry. The fear in Emily's voice was not fear of Lauren. It was fear of confronting the truth she had absorbed, a toxic culture, and mistaken it for normal. Lauren studied her for a long moment, then said, "Your mistake can be corrected. But that depends on how you move forward." Emily nodded again, as if clinging to a life raft. Michael recorded the note in the report. Emily Rogers retained pending mandatory unconscious bias training and senior mentorship. Reassessment in 3 months. A few customers applauded lightly, not mockingly, but in recognition that accountability could coexist with a second chance. Lauren then turned to Daniel Brooks. He stood tall, hands clasped behind his back, like a soldier being inspected. Brooks Michael said, "You are a key witness to this morning's event. We reviewed your recorded statement, and Dr. Carter has recommended you for temporary operational support." Daniel blinked, stunned. Meosa Lauren nodded, offering the first genuine smile she had shown all morning. "You showed courage, honesty, and an understanding of right and wrong. That is exactly what this branch needs right now." Daniel's eyes reddened, not from fear, but from the quiet shock of finally being seen for his integrity, instead of overlooked. Michael stepped to the center of the lobby and raised his voice. Effective immediately, the Midtown branch is placed under the restructuring authority of Dr. Lauren Carter. All staff will receive scheduled training notifications. The branch will remain open, but under special supervision. The whispers turned into relieved sighs. In the back, Zoe held her phone up her live stream, now surpassing 19,000 viewers. She whispered, "Everyone, this is history. A morning of discrimination just became a lesson for an entire system." Lauren inhaled deeply and looked around the lobby. The same lobby where she had been stopped, as if she did not belong. Now she stood among people who genuinely wanted change. And in that moment, she understood one person can break a toxic culture, but a collective can build an entirely new future. The morning had begun with disrespect. It ended with truth, accountability, and the realization that ordinary people had become witnesses to a transformation they never thought they would see with their own eyes. At 12:30 in the afternoon, sunlight spilled across the glass facade of the Midtown branch, reflecting the slumped figure of Thomas Blake as he packed up the last of his belongings inside the office that had symbolized his authority for 15 years. His shirt was wrinkled, his collar slightly crooked, and the once confident posture that had defined him was now twisted into a defeated silhouette. He lifted each notebook, each framed family photo, each decorative trinket he once considered trophies of success, placing them into a cardboard box with trembling hands. In the hallway, not a single employee stepped forward to console him. No sympathetic words, but no ridicule either. Only the deep, heavy silence of people who had lived under a culture built from his judgments and biases, now watching it collapse, like a rotted structure being torn down at exactly the right time. Michael Turner stood near the door, holding a folder, his voice professional to the point of frost. "Mr. Blake, this is your final pay statement. Your remaining vacation days have been processed. However, the ethics clause has been activated, meaning you are not eligible for bonuses or severance of any kind." Thomas froze, lifting his eyes toward Michael, but found no hatred there. No pity either, only responsibility. A long, hollow breath escaped him, sounding like the echo of a metal door closing behind a sentence that couldn't be appealed. He lifted the box, stepped out of the office, and when he walked past Lauren Carter, he paused for a single second. He didn't apologize. He didn't blame her. He simply looked at her regret, filling the space where dignity had once lived, regret for the better version of himself he had never chosen to become. Lauren did not respond to the look. She stood straight, her eyes still as a calm lake, but beneath that stillness ran deep currents of thought. She took no pleasure in seeing him lose his job. But she felt no remorse either. Because if she had remained silent today, hundreds of others would continue to endure the same biased words in the future. And silence was something she would never allow. Thomas walked out of the branch. The automatic doors opened and closed behind him, shutting the chapter he would never forget, an ending not marked by glory, but by a lesson. At 1 o'clock in the afternoon, inside the employee break room, Emily Rogers sat, curled in a chair, hands shaking uncontrollably. Her face was pale, her hair disheveled, her eyes swollen from crying. When Lauren entered, Emily nearly jumped to her feet, her voice cracked and desperate. "Dr. Carter, I am sorry. Please do not fire me." Lauren studied the young woman for a long moment. Her eyes were not stern the way they had been with Thomas. Instead, they carried the quiet understanding of someone who knew that real cultural change required guidance, not only punishment. Emily Lauren said, her voice, low but gentler than before, "You were wrong this morning. You followed harmful habits created by your former leadership. But mistakes do not define who you are. How you correct them does." Emily broke into sobs, speaking through stuttering breaths. I never thought I was hurting anyone. I just did what Mr. Blake always did." "And that is exactly the problem," Lauren replied, softly but sharply. "People never believe they are causing harm. But small words, small gestures, small attitudes accumulate into a massive, toxic culture." Emily nodded repeatedly, tears streaming. Lauren stepped closer, placed a hand on her shoulder, and spoke with the calm of someone who had once stood at the bottom herself and understood the fear of being judged unfairly. "You will stay. But from today on, you must be part of the solution, not the problem." It was the first time all day Emily managed even a small, honest smile. At 1:30 in the afternoon, near the security desk, Daniel Brooks stood in his usual position, though something about his stance had changed. It was straighter, steadier. Michael Turner approached him and extended his hand. "Daniel, I want to formally inform you. You are being appointed as the branch's temporary supervising officer until the board completes restructuring." Daniel's eyes widened, his jaw falling open. "Me, sir. But I am just security." Lauren stepped beside him, her smile no longer polite but proud. "No. You are the only one who had the courage to speak the truth during this morning's chaos. And real leadership begins with courage, not titles." Daniel blinked, lifted his head, and for the first time in years working at the Midtown branch, he felt he truly belonged. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Lauren gathered the remaining staff in a small meeting room. No one knew what she would say. No one sat still. But she did not open slides or begin with a lecture. She simply stood at the front, placed both hands on the table, and spoke with a voice that struck like a bell. Today marks the end of a painful chapter, but it is also the beginning of something better. Faces lowered, some out of shame, some out of relief, some out of hope. From now on, Lauren continued, we will rebuild the culture of this branch on respect, responsibility, and fairness. No one is allowed to belittle a customer. No one is allowed to judge without knowing the story. And no one is allowed to believe they are immune to consequences. She looked at each face, young, old, white, black, the overly confident, the quietly fearful. If you choose to stay, she said, you must accept change. If you cannot, I will sign your release immediately. A long silence followed. Then Daniel stepped forward, first nodding firmly, then Emily, then one by one the rest. Lauren exhaled slowly, allowing herself the first moment of ease she had felt all day. This was only the beginning. The morning that started with her being dismissed had become the afternoon she rebuilt an entire system. And as she looked around the room, Lauren knew one truth with absolute certainty. Real change does not begin with a sledgehammer tearing down a broken structure. It begins with helping those willing to step through the ruins and build something better. The morning had hurt. The afternoon restored her faith in justice. And for Lauren Carter, that was the greatest victory of the day. 3 months after the incident that shook the entire system, the Midtown branch had transformed so dramatically that even long-time customers barely recognized the place they once avoided because they felt unwelcome. Morning sunlight streamed through the large glass panels, illuminating the newly replaced seating area, tidy, warm, and intentionally inviting. A customer notice board stood at the entrance with a message printed boldly across it. Respect is the standard, not a choice. Internal customer service ratings had climbed from the lowest in the region to the top, and most astonishing of all, the number of minority customers returning to use the branch's services had risen by 42%, a figure even senior leadership had not anticipated. At the teller counter, Emily Rogers no longer resembled the frightened, shaken young woman who had nearly been suspended 3 months earlier. She stood upright, her smile genuine, her voice clear and courteous. The training sessions had done more than correct her service skills, they had repaired the way she saw the world. When a black customer walked in, asking about a business loan, Emily welcomed him with natural professionalism, free of the disguised biases she once carried. The sight made Lauren Carter, quietly observing from the corner, allow herself a small smile. Lauren had never believed that punishment alone created transformation. Punishment only stopped the harmful behavior. Real change came from rebuilding people from within, and Emily was living proof of that. But Midtown had another figure who had rewritten his story even more powerfully, Daniel Brooks. At the newly placed operations desk near the temporary management office, Daniel reviewed staffing schedules and workflow charts. The security uniform he once wore had been replaced with a crisp navy shirt, and his new nameplate read, Daniel Brooks, Interim Branch Supervisor. Every time he approved a customer file or corrected a process flaw, he remembered that moment 3 months earlier, the moment he chose to speak the truth, even though it could have cost him his job. He had never imagined that one small action, one simple sentence, "This behavior is not right," would change the entire trajectory of his life. But Lauren knew. Lauren had always known that justice was not only about holding the powerful accountable, but also about elevating those who lived with integrity. Daniel looked through the glass office window toward Lauren. Without speaking, his eyes conveyed a message of gratitude. "Thank you for seeing me." Lauren nodded back, gently but meaningfully. "You proved yourself." At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Lauren entered the meeting room where the entire staff waited to hear the first quarterly report since the restructuring. The room was small but warm, softly lit, the chairs placed close together to create a sense of unity. No one sat in the back row. No one avoided eye contact. Every gaze was fixed on Lauren with respect and anticipation. "I want to share the results from the past 3 months." Lauren began her voice, low and steady, each word shaped to land exactly where it needed to. An 89% decrease in discrimination complaints, a 31% increase in customer satisfaction, a 26% improvement in employee retention, and most importantly, revenue from minority clients has increased 53%, bringing an additional $12.7 million to this branch. A soft, proud exhale rippled through the room. No applause, no cheering, just an expanding warmth, the quiet pride of people realizing they had helped build something meaningful. Lauren continued. "These numbers did not come from my decisions. They did not come from the dismissal of Thomas Blake or the oversight of Michael Turner. They came from all of you people who chose to change." She paused, meeting the eyes of each person, Emily Daniel, the veteran staff, and the newly hired employees who joined after the restructuring. "Real change does not happen when we assume we are already perfect," Lauren said. "It happens when we recognize that we are not, and choose to learn again." A long-time employee raised her hand, speaking with a voice trembling from emotion. "Dr. Carter, if you had walked away that morning, if you had not called Chairwoman Grant, we would still be working in the dark." Lauren shook her head softly, a bittersweet smile touching her lips. "Sometimes justice begins in the moment when you simply cannot remain silent anymore. But that morning I was not thinking only of myself. I was thinking of people like you, people who deserved better." This time the applause came, not loud, not theatrical, but sincere enough that Lauren had to take a slow breath to keep her voice steady. When the meeting ended, Michael Turner stepped into the room with a rare smile. "Lauren, I just received word from the board of directors. They want you to present this restructuring model to all 12 regional branches next month." Lauren blinked, surprised, meaning regional expansion. "Not only regional," Michael replied, placing a folder onto the table, "but national. They want to evaluate whether the Midtown model should become the standard for the entire country." Silence settled over the room like a soft ribbon. Then, from the back, Emily breathed out, "You did it, Dr. Carter." Lauren stood still for a few seconds, feeling something close behind her, and something even larger opening before her. She turned toward the large glass window where sunlight streamed through. 3 months ago, she had been stopped right outside that very door. Today she walked through it as the woman reshaping an entire institution, and as the Atlanta breeze swept through the room, Lauren closed her eyes, briefly feeling the powerful current of energy flowing through her, the power of a morning filled with disrespect, transformed into fuel for systemic change. It was not just her victory. It was the victory of the underestimated, the overlooked, the silenced, now given a voice. Midtown's new beginning was born from the collapse of one man's prejudice. But it grew from the rising of a collective, guided by the woman who proved that justice is not something to wait for, but something to be made. From the perspective of an organizational culture expert, the story at the Midtown branch reminds us that real power does not lie in a job title or an expensive suit, but in how a system chooses to confront its own failures. Misconduct may begin with one individual, but it is silence that turns it into culture. And sometimes the courage of a single person, even someone who was underestimated, can ignite a transformation that reshapes an entire structure. Midtown didn't change because one manager was fired, but because a truth was exposed, justice does not arrive on its own. It is created through action. If this story resonates with you, hit like to help spread the message about everyday justice and subscribe, so you will not miss the journeys ahead, where truth always finds its voice. Before you leave comment with exactly 3 words, rise up now.